Monitor naming schemes must be one of the most confusing things on earth, and in that tradition Asus chose to give a handful of monitors almost exactly the same name. We're looking at the VG259QR here, and this is a 24.5-inch IPS monitor with a 165Hz refresh rate that retails for around $240 US. So far so good, but don't confuse this with the VG258QR or VG259QM. Those are two completely different monitors. There are a few more with a very similar name as well, so please pay close attention to the exact name when shopping. To make matters worse, many of those Asus monitors look almost identical, which is also true for the VG249Q, which I reviewed some time ago. Of course, we'll compare those two throughout the review. Another worthy comparison is to the Mobius EX2510 from BenQ. Spec-wise, the VG259QR and the Mobius are pretty similar, and both come with a 24.5-inch IPS panel. The factory menu of the Asus tells us that it uses a panel from Kista, which obviously is different to the AU Optronics panel that can be found in BenQ's EX2510. But Kista basically emerged from BenQ and is strongly related to AU Optronics, so it's not too far-fetched that those two panels might share some similarities. And spoiler alert, they do. Now, inside Asus' own portfolio, the closest one I've reviewed is the VG249Q, and from the outside you could easily mistake one for the other. The VG259QR looks like your typical Asus gaming monitor, and honestly, its design is a bit outdated with its techie patterns and red accents. But when it comes to ergonomics, it really shines. Height is adjustable in a very wide range, and that's even more true for swivel. Tilt and pivot are adjustable as well, and the screen can be rotated into portrait orientation. On top of that, all center positions are marked, so it's easy to align everything back straight. The ergonomics really leave nothing to be desired, and even the stand base is relatively small, which allows for more room for your mouse and keyboard. It's not quite as elegant as Zoe's base, but not too far off. The pillar of the stand allows cable routing and comes with a fiddle cover that hides a small portion of our cables, like 2 inches or so. The more useful features include a pair of integrated speakers. These sound as crappy as most integrated speakers do, and by far not as good as those that can be found in the Mobius. But it's good to have at least some speakers included. And I'm glad that Asus decided to go for a directional toggle instead of using buttons for the menu navigation like they did with the VG249Q. But what about the panel of the VG259QR? First up, we get a pretty good brightness range, reaching from 60 nits at the lowest setting to a maximum of nearly 350, meaning you can easily use this monitor in a bright room while not having to burn your eyes at night. A good middle ground is a brightness of around 140 nits, which we get at a setting of 32. At this setting I measured a pretty good contrast ratio of 1248:1, which is about a quarter higher than our average IPS panel. Coincidentally, this is about the same I've measured for the EX2510. Interesting. And just like with my unit of the EX2510, we got a really clean backlight here. Even the exaggerated exposure only shows just a minor bright spot at the top left corner. Comparing this to the EX2510, it's remarkable how similar they are, despite the fact that the backlight uniformity can vary highly even across different units of the same monitor. Now, even the coating of both monitors seems to be very similar, if not identical. But when it comes to color rendering, the Asus goes a slightly different route. Adobe RGB and DCI-P3 are not covered enough to really work with them, but this is also true for the EX2510. But it still managed to cover about 98% of the important sRGB color space, whereas the Asus scratches on the 90% mark. Now, unlike the Mobius, the Asus has some difficulties in the cyan to green range and also can't display highly saturated blues, leading to this result. At least the overall gamut volume is spot on 100% sRGB, so the monitor is pretty much as colorful as it should be, even if not exactly accurate. So, how accurate is it? Out of the box, the Asus has the racing mode pre-selected, which, despite the weird naming choice, is the most accurate mode. Now, accurate in this case is relative. The color temperature is almost spot on 6500 Kelvin, but there's still a color tint preventing an accurate white point. Though the grayscale performance is good and the gamma tracking is alright as well. Naturally, delta E's in its uncalibrated and unprofiled state are high, as we kinda expect. But also the color hues are a bit off, which mainly can be attributed to the greens being shifted towards yellow, which definitely is visible with bare eyes. With some OSD tweaking, we can at least fix the white point and get a decent uncalibrated accuracy. And performing a full calibration and profiling on top of that leads to an okay result. Especially the maximum delta E remains very high, as the Asus just can't display blues that are saturated enough to comply to the sRGB standard. Anyway, these are the picture quality related OSD settings that I recommend using. And as always, you can get my ICC profile from the video description, which you can use in conjunction with these settings. Now, where does that leave us for content consumption and especially for content creation? Well, for watching videos, gaming or browsing through the web, the accuracy and overall picture quality definitely is more than good enough. And to be honest, it better ought to be, given we're looking at one of the more expensive 24-inch 144Hz-ish monitors here. And that's also true for the Mobius EX2510. But the Mobius straight up beats the Asus when it comes to creating content. It's just more accurate in its default state, and calibration leads to much better results. On top of that, we get a ridiculously accurate sRGB mode with the Mobius. Well, the Asus also provides an sRGB mode, which I didn't even bother covering because it's that bad. But here's the data in case you're interested. Now, in comparison to the EX2510, we get 21 Hz more, which is about a 15% increase in frame rate. That's obviously nothing to write home about, but more Hz, more better. And there's this little NVIDIA G-Sync sticker on the VG259QR that the Mobius doesn't have. This indicates that the Asus was tested and certified by NVIDIA to be G-Sync compatible. Well, it should indicate that, and it usually does, but I believe Asus is trying to fool us here. See, on the website they state G-Sync compatible ready, which is a certification that doesn't even exist as far as I'm aware. This to me sounds like Asus is basically saying it can be used with G-Sync, but we didn't receive a certification from NVIDIA. This tier of G-Sync generally is referred to as uncertified G-Sync. I have a video explaining the tiers of G-Sync that I link in the top right corner if you want to know more. But certainly G-Sync compatible ready sounds much nicer than uncertified G-Sync, but to me that's dangerously close to false advertising, leading potential customers to believe that this monitor got the G-Sync certification. And in fact, the VG259QR behaves just like any other uncertified G-Sync monitor. G-Sync is disabled by default, and we get the typical warning message in the NVIDIA control panel clearly stating that this monitor does not have a G-Sync certification. But yet the monitor's OSD clearly states G-Sync compatible, here even minus that ready appendix. This definitely seems a bit dodgy to me, and during my own testing I have to say the adaptive sync performance is not flawless. Now on the plus side, the Asus provides low frame rate compensation with frame doubling starting at about 55 Hz, and the transition to LFC is pretty smooth. But one of the hardest adaptive sync tests, which as strange as it sounds is the ruler tool in Adobe Camera Raw, has the VG259QR flickering a bit. And I don't think this would meet NVIDIA's quality standard for a G-Sync certified monitor. In actual games though, I wasn't able to provoke any flickering apart from some occasional short flickers inside game menus, nothing inside the actual game though. So I believe the adaptive sync experience should be fine for most people. However, the EX2510, which doesn't come with the borderline deceiving G-Sync compatible ready advertising, does a better job delivering a flawless adaptive sync experience. Speaking of deceiving advertising, of course the VG259QR is advertised as a 1 millisecond response time monitor, like almost any other gaming monitor on this planet. But let's use Bill Burst's pursued camera technique to check how it actually performs. The OSD provides a slider for overdrive reaching from 0 to 100. Well, we don't really get a 100-step overdrive adjustment here, but increments of 20, resulting in 6 different levels. 6 modes are still more than average, but which Asus just give us the full 0 to 100 slider. Now, taking a quick look at all modes, we see a very mild effect going on from 0 to 80, with a more significant jump going to trace-free 100. There's really not much going on in the low trace-free range, so we can actually get rid of the first row. However, there are some interesting things going on with lighted transitions. There is definitely less smearing in the lighted track, so it's a good idea to keep an eye on that as well. As trace-free 100 shows inverse ghosting in all tracks, 80 definitely is the best setting for 165Hz. But we're still getting some ghosting here, so I wish something like 90 was an option too. But that's not the case, hence 80 is the best mode. And that's also true at 144 and 120Hz, even down to 60. So we got a single overdrive mode that's best for any refresh rate. Now let's pull up some comparisons. Against its slightly smaller brother, it definitely shows more ghosting in the middle track. The same is true against the EX2510, but let's not forget that the Mobius and the VG259Q are the fastest IPS monitors of their class that I've tested to date, together with the now discontinued second version AUC24G2. The VG259QR definitely is not a slow monitor, but it can keep up with the fastest ones on the market. And we're already allowing it to run at 165Hz, which gives it a mild advantage in terms of motion blur. With the MSI G24-1, we got a monitor that more closely resembles the response times performance of the VG249QR. The MSI shows ever so slightly more smearing in the light track, but they're close enough to call them evenly matched. Now remember when I said I believe the Mobius and the VG259QR have a very similar panel? Well, how does it come then that the Asus has slower response times and therefore more ghosting? And the answer is different overdrive. Unfortunately, Asus didn't tune the overdrive as good as it could be, so we're not using the panel to its full potential. But let me show you something. How about this? This not only looks better, but it's also pretty damn close to the Mobius. However, this mode is only available through the factory menu. To get there, you have to power off the monitor, then press and hold down the directional toggle while turning the monitor back on. Opening up the menu, you see a little F at the top you have to navigate to. Now, the option called OD Strong Weak is a fine control for the overdrive strength, reaching from 0 to 15. I found starting with trace-free 100 and then turning the overdrive control down from the default 8 to 0 gives the best result. The annoying part though is that the overdrive setting will be reset as soon as the monitor either goes to standby or is turned off. It's a shame that Asus just didn't make this overdrive setting available from the plain normal menu. And this is especially annoying as the EX2510 basically does this out of the box without the hassle of going into the factory menu. And the EX2510 also has a pretty good backlight strobing mode. So let's check whether the Asus can counter that. Yep, that's a no. To be fair though, the Asus strobing mode is still better than what many others offer, but just miles behind both BenQ monitors. So I definitely focused a bit on comparing the VG249QR to the Mobius, as they have a very similar panel and usually cost about the same. But actually inside Asus' own portfolio, the VG249Q is another tough opponent, pun intended. From a gaming standpoint, it delivers the same performance as the Mobius at a cheaper price. Now let's get this straight. With the VG259QR, Asus basically have built a slightly worse Mobius EX2510. A few aspects like for instance their contrast ratio and maximum brightness are on par, while the color performance as well as the response times related stuff is just a bit worse with the Asus. The only advantages the VG259QR has over the Mobius is that it can be rotated into portrait orientation and that it has a very mild motion blur advantage thanks to its 165Hz refresh rate as opposed to 144Hz. That definitely does not justify paying the same money for the Asus, so the only reason to get this over the EX2510 is when you can get it cheaper. Or if the EX2510 isn't available in your region, of course. Currently, they're about the same price in most regions, but I'll leave the links down below. And if they're the same price, or at least close, honestly, just get the Mobius EX2510 instead. Thanks for watching and consider to subscribe.